Okay, hi folks. I'm Eric Brynjolfsson. This is the Digital Economy Lab lunch seminar, and I am delighted to be able to welcome my old friend from MIT, David Autor. We've known each other for, I think, at least 25 years when we first started looking at how IT and AI and digitization were changing the labor market with Frank Levy and others. We got a little group together, went over to CSAIL, the Computer Science and AI Lab, to bring some economists over there to try to learn what all this technology was about. He's the Ford Professor at the MIT Department of Economics and the co-director of the MIT Shaping of the Future of the Work initiative. He looks at the labor market impacts of technological change, globalization, job polarization, skill demands, earnings levels, inequality, and electoral outcomes. He has lots and lots of awards, which I won't read all of them because we don't have time. But I'm going to pick out two that I think are kind of fun. The Economist magazine labeled him the academic voice of the American worker. And John Oliver of TV fame labeled him the twerpy MIT economist on a segment on automation and employment. So with that, where is David? There he is. David, come on up and tell us, this burning question, does automation replace experts or does it augment expertise? What's the answer?
I'm going to keep you guessing. Spoiler alert, though. Okay, thank you very much. It's a delight to be here. So I want to talk about the notion of automation exposure and expertise and how these things are connected. So let me just start with a simple question. Two occupations, crossing guard, air traffic controller. I think we can all agree that these are basically the same job, right? The job is to prevent collisions between things, between airplanes and other aircraft, between children and cars. And yet, there are two important differences between them. The first one is expertise, right? So air traffic controllers make 4 times what crossing guards do, not necessarily because what they do is more valuable. If we had to spend $130,000 to prevent our children from being run, we probably would. The difference is that, requires no training or certification to become a crossing guard in any U.S. state, whereas it requires years of air traffic control college and then thousands of hours of apprenticeship to become an air traffic controller. But I'm not making a point about human capital and that the return to human capital needs to be high because it takes a long time to acquire. I'm making a point about knowledge specialization. So if we suddenly ran short on crossing guards, we could get air traffic controllers to come out of their towers and do that job. But if we ran short on air traffic controllers, we could not get crossing guards to do that job. And so one job is more expert in this, and one is less expert in the sense that experts can generally do non-expert work, but non-experts cannot generally do expert work. And so skills may be mobile downwards and not upward. That's one observation. There's a second difference between these two occupations, which is that this one is really exposed to technology and automation, and this one is not, right? No computers in sight. If you were to adopt a sort of conventional frame of mind that says, let's measure the exposure of occupations to technology, right? You'd say, oh my God, really bad to be an air traffic controller, really good to be a crossing guard. But of course, that makes no sense, right? In fact, the air traffic controller's job wouldn't exist without the technology that they use. Their expertise, in fact, is embodied in their knowledge of those tools. So I want to highlight that because AI exposure is the term that is very frequently invoked nowadays to talk about what it means, what technology is going to do, right? So the IMF reports that 40% of all jobs are exposed to AI. AI exposure is the new buzz term. Here's what it really means, and you know what it really means, right? And our literature, the economics literature, is not at all immune from this pornography. There's lots and lots and lots of figures about how exposed this or that is, right? And I'm implicating Eric, but I'm implicating myself. Here's Fry and Osborne and the famous 46% graph, et cetera. And so the first point I want to make is that exposure is actually not a very useful term for thinking about what technology, how it affects work, and particularly how it affects expertise. So does automation or AI exposure mean that occupation and a job is at risk, right? Is it the case that if you're exposed, you're hosed, right? Which I think is the kind of subtext of a lot of discussion. Well, I don't know. I mean, first of all, in our old school way of thinking, capital and labor typically thought of as a complement. So maybe we ought to be happy about having capital. An occupation or task might be exposed to automation or augmentation. There's lots of papers about that. The thesis of this project is that depending on which tasks are automated, automation could diminish or amplify the demand for human expertise. So let me make this visually extremely clear. Oh, sorry, let me define my term. So expertise. Expertise means domain-specific knowledge or competency required to do something, right? Could be bake a loaf of bread, code an app, diagnose a patient, remodel a kitchen, etc. Not all expertise is valuable. You really need two things for it to be valuable. One is, of course, the thing it enables is itself valuable, right? So it's got to be data science, not card tricks. And the second, it must be scarce, right? Because if everyone is expert, no one is expert, right? Expertise is in some sense defined by the fact that only some people can do it. And it's a moving concept. It's different from education, right? Your education is static. Once you get it, it doesn't go away. But you could have expertise in some valuable skill that all of a sudden is no longer valuable because we have a cheap machine substitute for it. So they are distinct, and not all expertise is gained through education. Okay, so when does automation exposure replace experts or complement expertise? So let's consider, here's an occupation. It has a bunch of tasks. I've ranked them from lowest to highest expertise. So in other words, you could think of the people who do this, if you do this task, you could also do this one. But if you do this one, does not imply you could do that one. Yes.
First, it's okay to have questions.
Please. Yes.
For people too. So I just want to sharpen some words that are sometimes used in different ways. You and I talked about this in the office.
Mm-hmm.
So exposure could be either automation or augmentation. It could and I think in fairness to all those other papers, most of them, not all of them, but they didn't say it was always replacing. And then the word automation, you're using it a little differently than I've been using it, which is okay, but or maybe not.
I'm actually using it in the sense of a task is replaced by a machine.
Task is replaced,
but
it could still be augmenting
for
the job.
For the job, exactly.
Okay.
So automation, right? I think in our contemporary vocabulary means a task that was formerly done by a worker is now done by a machine.
Okay. So it could replace the task, but not replace the person.
Yes, so that's exactly where I'm going. Good, thanks for the clarification. Okay, so these are the tasks in an occupation, right? So, and for the occupation to be done, all these tasks need to be completed, right? And occupations are bundles of tasks, and I'm going to take as a given, there's a reason for that, right? We don't have infinite division of labor. It's not just the frictions, there are some things that are necessarily, what do I want to say? They're commingled, whether you want them to be or not, right? So I spend a lot of time doing receipts after travel, right? I didn't get a PhD in receipts. Why am I doing that? It's because it's inseparable, right? It would be too costly for me to explain it to someone rather than just to do it, right? So there's lots of support. But if someone could automate that for me, that would, I would be 24% happier. Okay, so now, okay, great. So let's imagine these most expert tasks are automated. So what happens? Well, look, labor productivity is going to go up. The average expertise requirements of this occupation are going to go down, right? Employment is going to rise, right? Because we have higher productivity and there's fewer barriers to entry. More people can do this thing. Wages may or may not rise, right? Because in fact, the expertise requirements have fallen. You've allowed all kinds of people to do this work. It's possible that employment would rise and wages would fall. Okay, now let's take another example. Here, same occupation, but now I'm going to automate the inexpert tasks, right? So now labor productivity is going to rise again. Average expertise requirements are also going to rise. Employment might not rise, actually, because productivity is rising, but there's fewer people who can do this work. It's now more specialized. Wages probably will go up, right? Both because it's more productive and because in compositional terms, we should have higher skilled workers. Okay, so now let me give you an example of this. Let's imagine those are the same job, actually. Sorry, let me take it back. Let's imagine those are the same set of tasks in two different jobs, right? So let's say the person on the left is my admin assistant who does a lot of proofing for me of papers and letters. The person on the right is me. And the thing in yellow is Claude, right? So I have relied on my admin assistant for decades to carefully proof my letters and improve them. I now often turn to Claude because Claude works weekends and I write all my letters on the weekend. So for me, Claude has actually allowed me to specialize further. It's made me more productive, more efficient, right? It's taken away a supporting task. For my admin assistant, right, it's actually removed an expert task, right? Same task, and yet different effects on different jobs. Okay, so give you an example. Let's consider the job of taxi and chauffeur driver, right? Between 1980 and 2020, average wages in the US economy rose by 20% in real terms. Taxi and chauffeur drivers, although they were rising slightly faster, they actually rose more slowly. Consider what happened to their employment. It grew by 240% between 2000 and 2020, right? This is an occupation where technology reduced expertise requirements, made it easy to enter. We had massive employment growth, but really not much wage growth. Consider the job of proofreaders, right? Their wages have risen by 40% over the last couple of decades. Their employment has gone way down. Why is that? I don't know for sure, but you could speculate. One reason is this is a much more specialized activity than it used to be. Proofreading used to be like spell checking, right? Now it's helping people write, okay? So that's the idea here. Okay, so let me just skip that. Okay, so this is, by the way, I'll come back to it. What people understand this, right? This is the slide we call blood taxi. People understand this. They understand that when you take away the expert content of their work, it's not good for them, right? Taxi drivers understood that Uber was not a good thing for them, right? Not because they didn't want people to have cheaper or more convenient rides. They didn't want a job that anyone else could do. Right? Or another example, my colleague and co-author, John Horton of the Sloan School, his family runs a construction business. And he gave me a great anecdote. If you're making concrete walls, you reinforce them with rebar, reinforcement bar, which is just steel, and it goes in the concrete, and that gives it, a tensile strength as well as crush resistance. There's not much to it, but the rebar comes out the top, and there is a skilled activity that is called tying the rebar, and you have to do that right. And specialized construction workers do that. Well, now you can go to Home Depot and you can buy a little handheld tool that for a couple $1,000s will do rebar tying. Construction workers hate it. And the labor unions in Massachusetts don't let employers use it. Why? They let them use jackhammers. They let them use, electric drills and pneumatic hammers. Why do they resist this? Well, they understand that you've taken a thing that was a specialized form of expertise and made it so anyone could do it, right? They don't like that automation. There's lots of types of automation they like. They don't like that one, understandably so. So this idea is not foreign. Okay, great. So, okay, I'm not gonna give a formal model. I'm just gonna give you the central foundation. So a lot of it is here in the Matryoshka dolls, right? So expertise is like Matryoshka dolls, right? The big experts contain the little experts, but not vice versa. And this simply says, and it's an oversimplification, is that most people, if they had to, right, they could do manual labor, they could do cleaning, they could do some food service, not really good, but whereas the opposite is the reverse is not true. So experts frequently can do less expert work, but not vice versa. Now, let me be clear. Expertise is not one-dimensional, right? There's expertise in plumbing. There's expertise in physics. They have a lot in common, but they're not transferable, right? So I'm assuming. So I think it's correct to say that there's generic work that everyone could do, but that doesn't mean every expert could do every other expert's expert work. Okay. So the basic idea here, and this is important, is the tasks comprising an occupation are indivisible, right? This matters. If this just lived at the task level, this would not be useful. You need to believe that tasks are bundled in occupation for a reason. So when you take stuff out, you leave some things remaining. So automating one set of tasks does not eliminate the need for the others. The second is that accomplishing a specific task requires a form of task-specific expertise. Some of them are more expert than others. The third is that automation is going to displace labor from some expert tasks. And the fourth is there are going to be some generic tasks that remain, right? So in general, occupations won't be eliminated per se, but some of their tasks could be automated away. Okay, so let me skip the math. A lot of math happens, and then there are some implications. Okay, and these are very intuitive, I hope. The first is that expert work commands higher wages than generic work, even within education groups, even within white-collar, blue-collar, and service occupations. Now, you might say, well, that's a tautology. What do I mean by expert work, right? Probably higher wages, right? But actually, I'm going to try to measure expertise and show you that this is a real thing, I'm going to measure just, to create suspense in the room. I'm going to measure expertise using a content-agnostic measure of expertise that knows nothing about the content of work. Okay. Then the second implication is that changes in the task and occupation could raise or lower expertise demands, right? So if you add, let's say, if I remove low expertise tasks, expertise demands rise. If I remove high expertise tasks, expertise demands fall. And conversely for adding, I don't have a model for where adding comes from. I will measure addition, but I really motivate this through automation, as Eric pointed out. So changes in occupational expertise demands may have opposing effects on wages and employment, right? When you lower expertise demands, the skill requirements fall, but the set of people who are qualified to do it rises, productivity rises, quite possible for it to grow. Conversely, when you raise the expertise requirements in an occupation, it's possible that wages will rise and employment will not, because you've made the occupation more specialized. So you could think of this, so this is an important point, is that labor supply is elastic downward in terms of expertise, but inelastic upward. Right? So what's going to matter here, we're going to argue, is not only the quantity of tasks that people do, which is features in task models, but also the expertise of those tasks. Yes?
So I was thinking of bringing this up before when you said, fall in expertise raises employment. You're looking at the supply side, but there's also the demand side. And doesn't it depend on how
it does?
Demand is?
It does. That's right. So, in the longer, you could say that's like a short run effect or a medium run effect. In the long run, right, you could reduce, you could make it so anyone could do it, but then there's no need to do it, right? You could automate it away. That's right.
Or if everyone could do it twice, if this one person could do twice as much, right, then you don't have demand.
That's right. You saturate demand. Yes, absolutely. So there's two things that can happen, right? One is that demand isn't sufficiently elastic. Or the other is that there's just so much capital labor substitution that there's no labor left, right? That's the case of telephone operators, for example.
Yeah, but even before you get to that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. And that's right. And that doesn't happen in this model, in the model that you're not seeing. But a more realistic model would definitely incorporate that. Okay, so I need to measure how much expertise a job requires. Oh, yes, Maria.
So we'll just get a microphone.
I'll repeat the question in the interim. So,
thank you. So I get your point that labor supply will be inelastic, but to the extent that some of the expertise is really about information sharing, like that can be made really elastic, even if sort of the number of people is inelastic. Does that make sense? So, like,
you mean if like
supply of expertise can be quite elastic.
So the friction is in terms of communication?
Yeah. So it's like if expertise, say in healthcare, I don't know, is like about knowledge dissemination, then one expert can create very elastic amount, like a lot of expertise. So how does that, is that
absolutely.
Like
so that
not
would sort of
really in your model? Or
so that would be sort of changing the kind of boundaries in some sense. And that's not happening here, right? So I'm taking the bundle of tasks and occupation is fixed. And that is an important question, right? So it's not a question I'm addressing here, but I acknowledge that is a channel that is important that is not here. Okay, so we're going to measure how much expertise a job requires. We're going to measure what tasks have been removed and added from those occupations. We're going to quantify the change in expertise requirements due to the addition or removal of those tasks. And then we're going to distinguish the quantity of tasks added or removed from the expertise of these tasks. Okay, so let me now just actually tell you what I'm going to do for the rest of the, wrong button. Okay, yeah. So I'm going to show you how, I'm going to tell you how we measure expertise. I think that's independently interesting and hopefully useful. And I'm going to show you that our measure of expertise is predictive of wages, even conditional on a lot of other things that you would want to measure. Then I'm going to tell you how we determine what tasks have been added and removed from an occupation over time. And then we're going to apply the same measurement expertise, these same expertise measures to say how is an occupation's expertise requirements changed by what has been added and what has been removed. And then I'm going to bring these to just data from 1980 to 2018 at the occupational level and look at changes in expertise, changes in wages, changes in employment, and this will be a set of correlations, right? I'm not taking a stand in this part about why what is removed and what is added. So these will just be a set of correlations. In the final section of the paper, I will then take a slightly more cause and effect approach. I don't want to invoke the causal word because it's a little loose, but I will look at one set of tasks that we know that have been removed over the last 4 decades is tasks that are routine intensive, right? That follow well-understood rules and procedures that can be carried out by non-sentient machines. So I'll be able to look at occupations according to their routine task exposure, what will be removed. And then I will be able to say, well, some of these are going to become more expert and some are going to become less expert as a result of the same force, just like the Claude example. And then I'll show you how that works for wages. Okay, that's my talk. All right, so first is we want a measure of expertise that is not really value-laden, right? That is not based on our prior sitting down and saying that sounds really expert. The starting point of this is Zipf's law. So you've all heard of Zipf's law. I didn't know Zipf was a linguist. And what Zipf noticed is that frequency of words follows a power law. And some are much more frequent than others, and it's well described by an exponential distribution. This is linked in neuroscience to what's called the efficient coding hypothesis. The efficient coding hypothesis is a theory of how languages evolve. And it says, look, when we're communicating, I'd like to communicate with you as briefly as possible. But there's a risk that if I use too much brevity, you won't understand what I mean. So I'm always trading off the economy of language with the risk of miscommunication. But then language evolves to recognize those constraints. So if there's a concept that we're all familiar with, right, then we will have a common short words that we'll use. And I will be able to say, LLM or GPT or whatever, and you'll all know what I mean. You wouldn't have known what I meant 5 years ago, but you know what I mean now. So that's the efficient coding hypothesis. And this is this trade-off. Okay, so that's fine. That seems intuitive. So how is that relevant to us? Well, the hypothesis that we use is, experts are people who commonly encounter things that are not common for others, right? So if you're, an economist, you're going to encounter heteroscedasticity, an instrumental variable, right? And, marginal condition, et cetera. Or if you're a computer scientist, right, you'll say neural net, whatever. And so there will be words that you use that are common for you, but are uncommon for the rest of the world. That's jargon, right? But that jargon, there's a reason jargon arises, right? Why does the military speak in acronyms? They have to communicate efficiently about things that are unfamiliar for the rest of us, but are very familiar to them. And so this is how jargon develops. And even when someone says, a person's a code switcher, what do they mean, right? They can speak both the standard language and the jargon, right? Paul Krugman, excellent code switcher, right? Can speak economics and can communicate about economics to people who are not economists. So the corollary is that experts will develop precise words for common events that are uncommon for non-experts. So the word heteroscedasticity or blow bag in plumbing, but you can use it in other places, indemnify in law, et cetera. And so we're going to measure the expertise of job tasks by taking job task descriptions, and we're going to look for words that have low frequency and low entropy. Low frequency means they're not found very commonly, and low entropy means even conditional on how frequently they occur, they're only found in a few places, right? They're not found across many corpora. And so we're going to say expert tasks are tasks that in part have descriptions that use low entropy, infrequent words. And so that's the whole idea. It sounds too simple. In fact, I will say, my co-author, Neil Thompson of the Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab at MIT, also an economist, proposed this idea, and I said, that's dumb, that's not going to work. That's how simple and appealing it is. Okay, so to get to measure this, we just take our copy of the Educator's Word Guide that everyone has off the shelf, and it lists 140,000 words. It gives measures of frequency and entropy, believe it or not. So we use those. This is the measure, not important. We also do a little bit of trimming of this thing using another measure to get rid of outliers in both directions, not important. Okay, so this doesn't work perfectly, right? So it will underestimate expertise when like words that are specialized get used in many places, like multi-purpose, evaluate, calculate, develop, right? Those will be seen as inexpert words, or words that are not often written about, like mop or workpiece, right? Those will be seen as expert words in our measure. Nevertheless, let me skip that. We're going to apply these to two data sources. We're going to use the 1977 Dictionary of Occupational Titles, which is a cross-section description of jobs. And then we're going to use the 2018 Occupational Information Network. Now, I want to say these are different time periods and different non-comparable volumes, right? They don't use the same definitions, and that's going to be an issue we're going to deal with next. Okay, so for example, here are some task descriptions. These are high expertise: reinstall plumbing and electrical and rigging connections. May operate punch card tabulating machines. Sing a cappella or with musical accompaniment, right? These appear to be high expertise. Yes?
Quick question. Do you use just for words or phrase like rigging connection?
We use it just for the words within a task. It's just the average of the words within a task.
But there's some like phrases, pairs that also are unusual.
Yeah, we're not using this.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I understand. You're right. And we're not even using that information. Here's some low expertise tasks, right? Make bed, print and make copies of work, transport mail from one workstation to another, or guard street crossing during hours when children are going to and coming from school, right? Our crossing guards, right? Notice it's not about the number of words or the number of syllables, right? It's about the type of words that are used. Okay. So we're going to use these with harmonized measures from the census. That's not so important. Let me just sort of show you cross-sectionally the relationship between our measure of expertise and measures of earnings. Right? So this is in 1980 and this is 2018. These are bivariate regressions, right, of regressing expertise standardized, right, 0 is the mean, against wages. So for example, this has a slope of 0.16. So it says, one higher standard deviation of expertise associated with, 15% higher wages. Here's the same thing in 2018. It's a little more steeper. Now you're saying that's not impressive. Of course, you would have expected that, right? Aerospace engineers, highly educated. Male clerks, not so highly educated. Here's the same thing again, controlling for the educational composition of all the people in the occupation, right? And this still remains quite well estimated and precise. Now, here's this again, looking, actually, let me show this to you first. Okay, so we do this for 12 occupational categories, right? Clerical administrative support, construction mechanic, managers and executives, farming and mining, production operative, health services, sales and minus advertising, cleaning and protective, professional and financial, transportation, technician, personal services. You can see that in 10 of those 12, right, this is a well-determined relationship. So it's actually pretty good at understanding the difference between, different types of personal services. And just to give you, and then I'll come back to the question, right? So consider, these are two service occupations, housekeepers and guard supervisors, right? Very different expertise levels, pretty different wage levels. Or, in clerical, messengers versus statistical clerks, right? Or, in professionals, advertisers versus economists, right? Different expertise levels, different wage levels. Yes?
Expertise, but never enter into later models?
Say it one more time.
Does your model account for high expertise things that might appear in your earlier grasp, but become almost or completely automated and disappear in later?
Yes, yeah, that's exactly where we're going to go next. Absolutely. So we're going to look at things that are added and removed. So this is just measuring expertise in wage levels. This just sort of says this very simple thing appears to have some legs. Okay, so now I want to look at change in expertise requirements. Okay, so the problem is that I have tasks in 1977, I have tasks in 2018, they don't use the same language. So I want to find tasks are added and tasks are removed. So we just turn them into embeddings, which are just geometric representations of the proximity of words. We take the average embedding within a task. And then it has 1,500 dimensions, but just imagine it has 2. So the things in red are tasks from 1977. The things in blue are tasks from 2018. If they are in a similar radius, if they're next to one another, we say this task persisted. It was there in 77, it's not there, and then it's there in 2018. If we find that in a task in 2018 that has nothing very close to it, right, in vector space, we say it's a task that's newly added. If we find a task from 77 that has nothing very close to it in 2018, we say it's been removed. right? So that's, again, we're not spending time on content here. We're using just very straightforward statistics for doing this. So just to give you an example. Oh, okay, here. Okay, so here's a few examples. So these are dispatchers, right? And these have dispatchers, these things that are in red are tasks that have been removed, right? So dispatchers have lost order irregular routing of telegrams to prevent congestion of wire shortage, establish and reroute telegraph and submarine cable circuits to ensure flow of messages. Those are gone. As a result, the expertise level seems to have fallen, according to our measure, over this period. Or management support. So these blue things are tasks added, right? So determine location for product listing to maximize exposure to online traffic, implement security practices to preserve assets, minimize liability, ensure consumer privacy, et cetera, right? By our measure, the expertise thing of the level of this occupation is increased by a standard deviation. I could give you more examples. Here are proofreaders, right? Proofreaders become more expert primarily because the thing that's taken away is places proof and copy side by side on reading placard, right? Now, obviously, there's lots of things that have changed. This is very incomplete. So the miracle is that this works at all to the degree that it does. Okay, so then using that very simple notion of measuring expertise, then looking at the change in expertise implied by what is removed and what is added. And remember, removing something could raise or lower expertise. Adding something could raise or lower expertise. We calculate the change in expertise in each occupation, as well as the change in the number of tasks, right? Does your task quantity grow or contract? And then, of course, changes in employment, changes in earnings. So now I'm just going to show you some scatter plots that show you that relationship. Great. Okay. So what this is the relationship between changes in our estimate of expertise and changes in wages between 1980 and 2018 in all of our occupations, right? So you can read that it has a slope about 4, a standard error about 1.2. It's well determined. I don't remember, and this, by the way, if I put in 12 occupation main effects, which I do, I can't remember if they're in there or not, but it looks just as clear, right? So this is actually not simple. This is not just comparing lawyers to electricians, right? It's comparing, linemen to master electricians or something. So that's a kind of a first result. This shows you the relationship between change in occupational expertise and change in occupational employment. And surprisingly, this is negative, right? So it appears by our simple metric, and again, this is true in conditional and occupation dummies, the things that have become more specialized have become relatively higher pay and relatively smaller. Now, you might be saying, I would like some equations. You might be saying, is this change in wages, is it because people are getting paid more for the same thing, or because the people who are doing the work are more specialized, right? So the way we try to answer that question is we estimate just a set of cross-sectional wage regressions. We regress in each period wages in occupation on education, experience, and other covariates. And then we get the predicted wage in each occupation. And that's a measure of what we think you should earn based on who's in it, right? And so when we see a change, right, the change in the predicted wage means there's been a change in the human capital of people doing the job. Then the total change in the wage is the predicted component and the non-predicted component, meaning the actual composition of people and then the additional pay differences beyond that composition. So this shows you the figure I showed you a minute ago that just shows you the raw wage changes, and this shows you the expected wage changes. So the slope of this one is 4, the slope of this one is about 1.2. So it is the case that people are becoming more skilled in the occupations that appear to become more expert. That's not most of it, it's about a third of it. I don't have a strong view on what's supposed to happen, right? I'd be kind of surprised if this were 0. But it says, look, when something becomes more specialized, wages go up, and the people doing the work become observably more skilled. Okay, so let me now just sort of try to make the point why this goes back to my yellow pyramids at the beginning of the figure, right? So here are occupations that have expertise changes simply due to task removal. right? So here they become less expert because tasks have been removed. Here they become more expert because tasks have been removed, right? This is predictive of wage growth. Here's occupations that change expertise because of task addition, right? And things that become less expert because inexpert tasks have been added, wages decline. Things that become more expert because expert tasks have been added, wages rise. And these are true conditional on one another, not even that correlated, right? So in other words, it surprisingly does appear to be true that either of these things, either, you can add, you can subtract, and this is why exposure is not the most relevant measure, right? Because, they're exposed and things are changing, but they're changing in very different ways. So here's the same thing for addition. This is, removing inexpert tasks and adding, this is, what is this? Sorry. Oh yeah, this is expertise removal. What was the last one? I apologize. How did these differ? This is expected wages. I'm sorry. This is not the actual, this is the expected wage. I apologize. Okay, great. We also do this for employment, not as clear, right? Removing expertise by removing tasks appears to be associated with rising employment. It's not so clear for adding expert tasks. But now, you might be saying, look, I've talked about changes in expertise, but the way expertise is changing is by tasks being added or removed. So what about that? And there's a lot of work that says that what we should be concerned about is the number of tasks that you have. And so we wanted to consider how is that related? It is related. I'm going to, spoiler alert, they both matter. So here's a figure where we try to plot occupations according to their net task share change and their net expertise change. These are not related. So the slope is minus 0.2, standard error 0.14. This is not a statistically significant relationship. So you can see occupations, for example, like physicians. They have more tasks, they become more expert. Here are occupations like accounting clerks, where they have a reduced number of tasks, but more expertise up there. And you can go through all four quadrants, right? So these two things are not actually that correlated, turns out. So we asked the question, well, what if you look at changes in tasks and changes in expertise simultaneously? Seems like a natural thing to do. So here's the relationship between changes in expertise and changes in wages, conditional on changes in tasks. Here's changes in tasks, conditional on changes in expertise, and they appear both to be predictive of wage changes. So they appear to be very similar, but I've just told you they're not very correlated, actually, right? But they both appear to predict wage growth. So you might ask the question about employment, the same thing. So here is changes in expertise, changes in employment. You saw this before. Here's changes in task count and changes in employment. It goes in the other direction, right? So what is that telling us? Well, occupations that gain tasks do appear to become more in demand. Occupations that lose tasks do appear to become less in demand. The expertise is much closer to a supply change, right? In who is capable of doing the work, right? And when expertise falls, it's a reduction in barriers. When expertise requirements rise, it's an increase in barriers. So they're not actually the same thing. They both appear important. I would have loved if this was zero, but it's not. So it's, I think they're both useful for thinking about. And just to kind of give you a picture of this, we actually broke occupations into four quadrants. Those that gain tasks and gain expertise, and then gain tasks, lose expertise, lose tasks, gain expertise. Blah, blah. So if you look at the green is employment, the red is wages. So the best thing so in terms of wages, the best thing you can do is gain tasks and gain expertise. If it's not so good to gain tasks but lose expertise, right? And then it's really not good to, if for employment purposes, if you lose tasks and expertise requirements rise, right, we actually see employment contract. So that's not the simplest figure to read. It's only 45 minutes old. But the main point is that these are different dimensions of occupational change. One having to do with skills and the other having to do with sort of, I think, something closer to how much we're developing or investing in that or demanding it. Yes, Eric.
So linking this a little bit to automation, I mean, intuitively, it seems like often automating is going to eliminate some of the tasks.
Right.
And if you're doing that, then you maybe don't need as many people.
Right.
Whereas if there are more tasks, then it's sort of a bumble disease. You need to.
That's right. So yeah, you could say like automation, it'll tend to eliminate, right? But it still may make what remains more valuable, right? But adding tasks appears directly to be like adding demand, right? Now, let me say, okay, I've given you, I think I have 15 minutes, right? Okay, great. So I've given you a bunch of correlations, and it has not given you much intuition or insight into like what is actually going on under those beautiful scatter plots. They're not scatter plots. They're what? Bin scatters. Sorry, thank you. And bin scatters, as you know, you can make any plot beautiful with bin scatters, right? It just reduces to a couple points, and they're on a line. Can't fail. That's why I gave you the standard errors. Okay, so you might say, like, what is getting added? What is getting removed? Okay, so let me so now I'm going to lean on older work that tries to break tasks into abstract, routine, and manual. Now, so abstract tasks are tasks that require creativity, abstract reasoning, interpersonal skills. Routine tasks are tasks that essentially follow well-understood codified instructions that at one time were done by production workers, by officers, by clerical workers, increasingly done by machines. And then manual tasks are things that you wouldn't think of as that require dexterity and common sense, but do not require a lot of formal training or expertise. So we just used a large language model to take all of these task descriptions and categorize them into those three categories. It works actually surprisingly well. We audited them. We were shocked. So in 1977, according to our LLM, 50% of the tasks are routine, 30% are abstract, 17% are manual. In 2018, 50% of them are abstract, 33% are routine. So it's just a pure shift. So what that implies is, look, we know that a lot of what's changed is these set of tasks have been removed and these have been added. And if you look at our tasks that are removed, 2/3 of them turn out to be routine tasks, right? We didn't plan for this. It's just what popped out in the first iteration. And 3/4 of those that are added are abstract. Okay, so that makes some sense. So now we have the following thought, which is that, look, we know that these things are going to fall by 40%. So we can predict if you have routine tasks in 1980, you will have fewer of them by 2018. What does that mean for the expertise requirements in your job? Well, the answer is ambiguous. It depends where those are in your panoply of activities. So here what we do on this axis is we say, imagine the thought exercise simply, we take away all the routine tasks in your occupation. We don't say what's taken away. We just say, we just take them all away. Imagine they're all removed. What would that do to your expertise? And this says, look, for this set of occupations, expertise, the more we took away, the more expertise would fall. For this set of occupations, the more we took away, the more expertise would rise. We're just reversing the scales. This is really just one line. We're just cutting off at 0. But the same point is that the notion is the removal of routine task is bifurcating. Right? For some things, you're taking away the supporting activities. You're allowing people to specialize and focus on their comparative advantage. For other sets of occupations, you're taking away their primary activity, right? And so you're removing what's special about that occupation and reducing it down to the generic activities that many more people could do. So this is our prediction for what would happen to expertise. Sorry, this is our prediction. This is what happens. So it is predictive, right? So you can think of this as a kind of quasi-experiment, if you like, where we're taking initial conditions, right, which is how many routine tasks you have. We know they're going to go away. What would we predict would happen to you if these went away? These people would lose expertise. These people would gain expertise on average. And this is what happens to their wages, right? So it is absolutely the case that occupations that lose expertise because they had a lot of routine tasks, their relative wages do fall. And those that gain expertise because their routine tasks are removed, their wages do rise. And these, in fact, the slopes of these are almost identical. And so really, you could just draw this as a continuous line. So what this simply says is these are both highly exposed, right? These are exposed occupations, but the exposure has completely different meaning for how that work is going to change. So let me actually, I'm just going to, I'm just going to close up. Yes, please go ahead.
Hi. Okay. Hi, David. This is super interesting. I think one thing I'm struggling with a little bit is like the data set goes until 2018, right? And right now you're looking mainly at like routine tasks that are basically being completely automated away. And we're thinking about what AI actually offers to a lot of workers. It is more accessibility to higher levels of expertise. So what's your intuition towards like what that's going to do to the labor supply if lower skilled workers have access to expert level information at their fingertips?
Yeah, great. Okay, good. So several things in there. First of all, that's right. This ends in 2018, and that's partly out of convenience, but in some sense, this is all pre-AI, right? And this is not a prediction about AI. And routine tasks, right? That's a thing that has happened. It's not going to happen again. It's done. So this doesn't make, so what this framework says, look, is you could tell me what tasks are going to be removed and what were added. I could tell you what they would imply for the expertise of different people, right? But I think that there's obviously two kind of unknowns there, what's going to be removed and what's going to be added. And in particular, we don't, in this work, have a good theory of where that comes from, although I think there's plenty of reason to think that will come, right? So, for example, Anders Humlem has a nice recent paper about large language models and work in Denmark, and shows there's a lot of people are using it, and there are 6 categories of tasks that appear to be emerging, right? They are essentially ideation, where people work with the machine to develop ideas. There's data exploration, where people kind of in an unstructured way. There's ethics. That's where the lawyers look at the output of the AI and make sure it's okay. There's babysitting, right, which is a lot of just making sure it doesn't make errors. And I don't remember the other 2. But these are a substantial part of what people do. And let me actually, since I'm on a soapbox, also point out why the question of how much time is saved by AI is not a good question, right? Because there's lots and lots of things you do with AI that you wouldn't do. Are they saving you time? Right? It's not clear. Like, could I run a regression without my computer? No. How much time is it saving me? Well, none. I would never try without my computer, right? I just wouldn't do it. So it's not, time saving is not the right metric. I think, but what you said, I fully agree with the subtext of your question, which is that in the good scenario, AI enables more people to do more expert tasks. Now, that's not good for experts, right? But it's good for a lot of other people, right? Sort of like Uber. Uber was not good for taxi drivers. It was good for many people who are now doing a job that paid something more than what they were otherwise doing or offered more flexibility, presumably, or otherwise they wouldn't be doing it, right? And so, expertise, I may have implied that it's virtuous. Expertise is expensive. It's slow to acquire. It's fallible. Experts make the world difficult for everybody else, right? Everybody spends too much money on healthcare, on education, on law, on design, right? Done by highly credentialed experts. Now, if you are one of those experts, as presumably you all are, you're on both sides of that transaction, right? You're paying too much for your lawyer, but then they're paying you too much to teach. But for most people, they're not on both sides of that transaction, right? Things are just getting more expensive. So a technology that enabled more people to do more expert work, right, might create more competition, right? Nurse practitioners will create more competition for doctors, right? Paralegals might create more competition for lawyers and so on. But it potentially enables more people to also do more valuable work. So in the ideal world, AI makes more things like Uber, in my opinion. Okay, so just to conclude, does automation replace experts or augment expertise? The answer is yes. I hope I've convinced you. The relevant question is not merely how many tasks, but which tasks. This, I think, helps address the exposure paradox, that the focus on exposure misses the distinction between, what machines do and what people can do, right? So look, grocery checkout clerks, they must have 3 times as much productivity as they did 50 years ago, right? Because they just scan stuff, they don't make change, they use credit cards. They're not making higher wages, even though they're more productive, right? They're still making the minimum wage. Why is that? It's because it's inexpert work, right? It's not going to pay high pay, not because it's not physically productive, but because there's free entry, right? It's going to be bid down to the reservation wage of what the other outside option is. And similarly, there's lots of high-paid jobs that we don't do because we recognize they require tons of expertise to do them. So I think this sort of notion of the one-way fungibility of expertise is very important in thinking about that when you displace expert people, they will tend to do less expert things. Most people, if they're not academics, are doing the highest paid thing they can do. And so, in fact, there's a lot of research, right? Why do people who are just involuntarily displaced from work, goes back to Jacobson, Lalonde, and Sullivan, big job losses. There's a recent paper in the AR by Huckfeld that says, actually, people who stay in the same occupation after mass displacement, their wages aren't really affected. People who don't lose big. Now, that's an endogenous comparison, but the point is, it matters whether that expertise that you possess, can you reuse it, or is it now stranded, right? And so that's what I mean by one-way fungibility. So this is a very rough cut, obviously. There's a lot more ahead on this agenda, but hopefully this is a constructive way, not just to think about what has happened, but what will happen if we have a better handle on what things are going to be set to automation, and just as critically, what type of new task will appear and where. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That was great. We have 2 minutes for more questions. And so, yeah, right over here. There's also some online. Okay.
So do you think we need UBI?
Wow, that took me by surprise. No, I'm not a UBI fan. I mean, my talk has nothing to say about that. Let's be clear. I don't see any evidence that we're running out of work. And if I were going to take that kind of money to invest it in human welfare, I would invest it in improving work rather than improving leisure, because I'm a labor economist, not a leisure economist.
On that point, here's a question, maybe a little closer to your paper, but still a big picture. For those of us in higher, this is from online, of course. From those of us in higher ed, what are some future proactive case strategies that you recommend, given the easy and incoming automation of a lot of work like PowerPoint, slide creation, et cetera?
Yeah. So this comes to another distinction that I've been writing about, which is you can think of tools as being broadly in two categories. One are automation tools, like a dishwasher or an elevator or an automatic transmission. And they take all the expertise out of the activity. It's a completely closed system. It does it for you. No one expects you to, in an emergency, start shifting your car or whatever, or it wouldn't matter, right? And so I'm going to call those automation tools. Many other tools are collaboration tools. They're not useful unless you have some expertise, right? So a chainsaw, right? Good for some, dangerous for many, right? Or a stethoscope, right? Not useful to me. And so many tools are that. They actually are more useful to an expert. They make an expert more valuable, right? They kind of, there's like a force multiplier. And we should distinguish them because when thinking about what is AI for, is it an automation tool or is it a collaboration tool? Well, it depends on the domain. But in general, the way it's thought about is it's an automation tool, right? We're going to automate this thing. We gotta replicate, accelerate, overtake, substitute, right? Replace. But in many cases, that's not true. And that actually, when we try to do that, we fall short and actually create certain types of disasters, right? In radiology, in airplane accidents, and so on. When we try to automate, when there's still human expertise required. So in terms of thinking about students and AI, right? My best answer is they should think about how to collaborate, right? Where, and all of you know this, right? When you use AI and you use it for something you don't understand, you're out over your skis, right? You're doing something you shouldn't be able to do, you shouldn't do, and you might get the wrong answer, right? On the other hand, if you're using it for something you're good at, right, you will do it faster and better. And so we can collaborate with you. So it's a force multiplier for expertise. In some cases, we can fully automate something. I'm not opposed to automation, right? If we can do it better, cheaper, faster than the machine and reduce errors, do it. But there are many domains where that's not currently feasible, and we go about it wrong if we presume it is.
In the back there.
Great talk. I have a question regarding the definition of expertise.
Yeah.
So it seems you use the job description, like vocabulary complexity, as the matter there.
Yep.
And I like it. And I guess more from within each task, sometimes some people are in a high expertise region while others are in a relative low expertise region. So I guess compared to this kind of aggregated measure, do you have any insights on like within each task, like how do those people who are super, super good at their task versus those people who are not that good? And how does that change what we are seeing from your results?
Yeah, it's a good question. So first of all, like there is no, like, it's not like a quark, right? There is no fundamental task, right? It's a division and there's an infinite, there's no clear boundaries. And so the level at which you measure tasks really depends on like what level it's given to you in the data. I'm sure within a given task, there's a range of skills and we're just not getting at that, right? We're just having to use across task boundaries because we can't look at that intensive margin. I will just a few other comments on that. One, of course, is, you know, there are words that would have been expert 40 years ago that are not expert now, right? Like computer is a word like that. So in essence, to do this better, we need to build indices that take time periods into account, and ours doesn't. Another thing you might ask, I think is a legitimate question, is like, well, look, aren't you just picking up pretentious occupations that have fancy words and gets paid a lot for them, right? And why do I not think that's all we're doing? Because these tools are put together by Bureau of Labor Statistics. Their objective is to describe things as simply as possible, not simpler, right? They're not in the kind of marketing business. So I think it's useful, but I think this is really this is just very much a rough cut, as I said. I think there's lots of ways to do this better. I think to me the big discovery here is that it's using kind of really pretty first order observations from linguistics, right? You can extract a lot of it. We, as your colleague Matt Jenskow has pointed out, we didn't really use text as data until very recently, right? And now we have lots of text as data, but the question is, are we going to use it just to measure the things that we always tried to have in numbers, right? Oh, in the text I can find numbers, or can we actually construct different things from it? And actually, I see Eric is going to stop me, but let me make a final editorial comment, which is the danger of all these tools, right, is you can construct, a complete sandcastle out of everything you have in front of you, right? There's no discipline. So what I like about what we're doing here, and I think it's an aesthetic choice, but our measure is extremely simple, right? We are really doing very little data transformation. And I think that's a virtue in a world where there's too many degrees of freedom.
Very cool. In fact, we do have time for one more question if it's quick and a quick answer. So about right here.
Hi, thanks for your talk. My question is, we're starting to see a bunch of papers come out about the impacts of AI on labor, and there's some contradicting effects being shown across papers, and that might be due to occupation and task exposure. But I also think there's an argument to be made that it depends on the way AI is deployed and kind of how it's deployed. So I'm curious if you have any insights on how you think about, for example, making policy recommendations or other strategic decisions based on these different effects.
Yeah, so I think so first of all, there are contradictory effects. I think the best evidence is not much has happened yet. And that's what the recent Humlum and Vestergaard, I think, paper shows that, but that doesn't mean nothing will happen, it just means, we're early. But I agree that it's a choice and that it's a mistake to think there's only one way to go about this. So the little homily I just gave about sort of, automation versus collaboration, I think it really applies to design. And that I think there's a lot of misdesigned AI in the world that it just thinks the goal is to automate. And look, again, it's not a moral statement. If you can do it, great. I just think in many cases, we use bad benchmarks and convince ourselves that we've automated something when we've automated some tiny subset of something. And the problem is that incomplete automation doesn't usually make for good collaboration, right? Because it's black boxy. It doesn't communicate well with the user. And so if you recognize that you're making a tool that has to collaborate, that's more likely to be helpful to the worker, but it also changes the way you would build that tool, because you have to recognize it's going to have to, you don't just want to bring the person in at the last moment when the automation gives up, right? You want them to be engaged the whole time because they have value to add. So that's fundamental to design, in my opinion.
Well, David, that was an incredibly cool theory and incredibly cool, even cooler empirical approach. And I and a lot of other people are going to be using going forward. So classic David Autor, thank you so much.
Thank you.